This photographer took road trips across America to create one of the most well-known photo books in history, collaborated with Kerouac, Ginsberg, and the Rolling Stones, and experimented with photography the way that every artist should indulge in across every medium to push their work to new exceptional levels. Looking into and beyond the landmark achievements, techniques, and other profound work of well-known photographers is a great way to figure out how we might incorporate what we learn from them to create great work ourselves. Let's do that today with Street Smarts Volume 5, Robert Frank. Robert Frank was born in Switzerland in 1924. Throughout the 1940s, Frank worked as a photographer for graphic design studios throughout his home country. During this time, he honed his photography skills and created a handmade photo book called 40 Photos, before relocating to the United States in 1947 to take a job with Harper's Bazaar in New York City. Over the next 10 years, he would create another photo book from his travels in Peru, work freelance for magazines like Vogue and Fortune, and would become associated with Saul Leiter and Diane Arbus, who were known as the New York School of Photographers, according to Jane Livingston. All of this built up to what is seen as the most well-regarded work Robert Frank ever produced. The photographing of America is a large order. Read it all literally, the phrase would be an absurdity. You can't talk about Robert Frank without talking about the Americans. Often, its significance is compared to that of the work of Bresson. The Americans is considered one of the foundational works of street photography, and for many of us, is our gateway into taking the genre more seriously. It is also considered to be a paradigm shift for street and documentary photography, and what some estimate to be the book that changed photography forever. The Americans consist of 83 black and white photos that were taken over the course of 3 years, 1955, 56, and 57. The subjects of these photos outline the vast differences in people that could be seen throughout the United States at that time, and centered those subjects around themes of cars, ethnicity, and the flag. This photo series was taken on road trips that covered 10,000 miles of American roads in 30 different states. What is most astonishing to me about this work is that only 83 photos were used in the book out of 28,000 photos, or 767 rolls of film, that were taken by Frank over that span of time. In order to create this work, Robert Frank was supported by Edward Stitchin and Walker Evans, who were two other prominent photographers of their day. They approved Robert Frank's application for the Guggenheim Fellowship that funded this expedition. The book was released in 1958 and quickly sold out of its first run of 1,100 copies. Although I couldn't find an exact number of copies that have been sold since then, its value to the photography world can be seen in a few ways. Unlike many famous photo books that have gone out of print or are only available at extremely high price points, The Americans is easily accessible to anyone looking to expand their knowledge of street photography, which has allowed it to have a huge impact on inspiring new generations of photographers to this day. 2. Its layout and sequencing helped change the perception of what photography books were meant to be. And finally, it gave people outside of America a look into what the United States truly looked like in the post-war 1950s in a way that was contrary to the wealth and prosperity often associated with the era. If you are attempting to have a deeper understanding of photography and improve upon your work like I am, this is what you can take away from some of the techniques used by Frank. One was to get outside of his comfort zone. Being Swiss and not fully in touch with American customs and traditions gave him an outsider's perspective of everything that he saw on his legendary American road trip. He was also taking in and seeing most of what he photographed on his trip for the first time. This venture into the unknown also brought him into a few sets of conflicts that changed his perception of what America was and is. For example, in one town he was arrested more or less for being Jewish, and faced a number of anti-Semitic remarks on top of being arrested for 3 days without any truly justifiable reason. As previously mentioned, he took a ton of photos on this trip. Often, I see that there is some sense of pride in people taking a limited number of photos and getting something good. The more I research the greats of street photography, the more I note that they took a ton of photos on film and were not ashamed to burn through the film they had. The most extreme example of this being Winograd's 2,500 undeveloped rolls of 35mm film and 6,500 rolls never put to contact sheets that were left behind upon his death. Point being, when someone who hasn't produced any monumental accomplishments in photography tells you to shoot less, maybe take that advice with a grain of salt and shoot as much as you like to get something you find worthwhile in the same spirit as renowned photographers like Winogrand and Frank. Quality photos were found for Frank by shooting in ways that went against the norms and expectations of the times. Critiques of his work prior to it being published considered it messy, haphazard, and done without any regard for technique at all, because many of the shots were under or overexposed, out of focus, or contained untraditional compositions. The mentality for photography at the time was to create what is known as pure photography or straight photography, which was meant to communicate a summary of a scene or subject in one single, sharply focused, detailed, and well-composed shot. Frank was more concerned about creating a body of work that conveyed a feeling, emotion, and told a story about the places he visited. By creating a body of work that placed photos in a specific sequence to promote those feelings and emotions, Frank changed what was expected of documentary photography forever. Due to the popularity, controversial reactions, and discourse that were the result of the Americans. Until next time, keep developing.